Hey everybody, welcome to Postman. Welcome to our live stream. Hanging out today with Joyce. Hello, Joyce. How's your day
Hi.
going?
Hi. Good.
Good deal. All right. So today we're gonna nerd out on some gRPC. gRPC is a different type of API protocol. We're gonna basically show you how to design a gRPC based API and how to do some testing inside of Postman. And we'll get into like what all that stuff's about a little bit. I'm Ian Douglas. I'm a senior developer advocate here at Postman. Joyce, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, I'm Joyce. I'm the head of developer relations, and I'm based in San Francisco. And I learned you're not supposed to say nerd.
Oh,
Like,
really? Is
it's
that a bad
offensive
thing
to
now?
people. Like, geek is okay, but nerding out. So you should say geeking out. I think that's more
All right, we're
appropriate.
gonna geek out on
Yeah.
gRPC. All right, fair enough. Cool. We got people dropping in hellos. So hello to everybody from around the world. Happy time zone wherever you are. I heard that as a greeting as opposed to good morning, good afternoon,
Okay.
night kind of thing. So we'll just
We're
say happy
so
time zone wherever
appropriate.
you are. For most of us, I think it's still Thursday, but for some it may be Friday. So hope you got some fun weekend plans coming up. Uh, Cool. Well, like I said, we're gonna dive in on some gRPC. Joyce and I have been studying up a little bit on it. We've got some blog posts that we've been doing about it, and videos and so on. Joyce is our master of
Please
videos for
don't.
sure.
Okay, I was gonna say I'm not an expert on gRPC, and I think
No,
I don't
neither.
think there aren't very many people. There's only a handful of people that are experts on it, so I'm excited to learn about this together.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So we're going to be doing some learning in public. We're basically going to learn about like what is like how do we even start designing a gRPC API, and we're just going to walk through the design, show you how to do some testing inside of Postman, and then one thing I'm going to be doing from here is I'm actually going to start a live stream series where I actually code the server. So I'll talk about that a little bit as we wrap up for the day. But basically, I'm going to show people how to code this thing up as well, and I'll be doing that as learning in public as well. I'm also not an expert, but I've been studying up on this for a couple of months now, and it's really intriguing to learn about different kinds of APIs for
Oh,
sure.
it's a
Cool.
two-parter. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it'll be a multi-parter. I'm sure it's going to take me more than one
Oh.
stream to actually code up the server and get through all of that. But hello, everybody. Marlon says follows you on TikTok.
Oh my
Amazing content.
gosh. That's the
Yeah.
first time I've been recognized on online.
And Steven from LinkedIn says I like being called a nerd. So me too.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all
Acceptable.
good. Well, we like to start all of our live streams with "In case you missed it," and we've got a really big announcement that we came out with just yesterday. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Let me just pull chat out of the way for a moment. We basically announced a new partnership with Microsoft Azure. So in the past, we were able to release code directly to the AWS gateway, and now we've added a second gateway partner. And so you can now deploy directly to Microsoft Azure. So we've got this blog post. I'm going to drop the link in LinkedIn as well as in chat here if you want to go check that out. We're super excited about this new partnership that we've got with Microsoft. So you can definitely go check out the blog post and see what's going on with that. Microsoft themselves also posted about it. Um, so I think our blog post links over there, so you can definitely check that out as well. The work that we're going to be doing today is going to be on Postman V10, and V10 is still in a kind of a waitlist application sort of stage. So I'll drop a link in here as well that if you want to sign up for V10 access, you can give us your email address and we'll get you on the waitlist for that. The last thing that I'll kind of announce in case you missed it, we've renamed Postman Space Camp to be called Postman Intergalactic, and we've got our next session coming up in a couple of weeks. And we're going to be redoing the introduction to testing, and it's going to be using the V10 interface as well. And Pooja is going to be running that with Carson, and we're super excited to have our friends kind of dive in a little bit more on what is testing, how do we test APIs. We're going to have a whole bunch more sessions showing up here within the next week or so. Awesome. All right. Well, let's dive in a little bit on some gRPC. So, Joyce, when we
Ian,
talk about
not to
yeah.
interrupt, but while you were telling us what's new, I more people were chiming in on the chat,
Oh,
and
okay.
I will give a shout out. Sterling Chin says hello, and that he loves gRPC. And Sterling is
Yay.
actually one of the folks at Postman who worked on gRPC. So Sterling, if we
Very
run
true.
into any bugs, we're submitting issues immediately. So we'll just send you a timestamp to this live stream.
I'm glad Sterling is hanging out with us for sure. So yeah, we had a lot coming in on chat. One interesting thing about this interface is it doesn't remember the chat when we go back over to the screen where we see the chat over here on the side.
So,
Mm,
Ian, did I hear you correctly? Do I need to upgrade to V10 to be able to follow along, or can I follow along on V9?
you will be able to do the gRPC stuff on V9. Some of the interface will be a little bit different. We'll talk about that kind of as we go. Like, oh, if you're on V9, this might be a little bit different. So we'll make sure to highlight that as part of our work today. Someone was also asking, what's the Twitch channel to see this? If you're talking about this one, it's twitch.tv/getpostman. And if you want my live stream where I'm going to be doing the coding later on, I'll drop that link at the end of the session. All right. So, Joyce, let's talk about gRPC. So, we've done a little bit of research. I had a blog post that we shared about uh, comparing gRPC with HTTP based APIs. Um, if you had to summarize gRPC to somebody, like based on what you've learned and what you've shared on TikTok and so on, what would you say is like the main difference between HTTP based like REST and GraphQL versus gRPC?
Well, I got corrected big time when I posted on TikTok, and TikTok is not my only research method, but I will say that I have posted about gRPC versus REST, and some people have corrected me as you kind of corrected your question. It's not really if you get real pedantic about it, gRPC is not like apples and oranges to REST. REST is an architectural pattern. But you kind of corrected your question to say, what's the difference between HTTP and let's just say gRPC, which runs on HTTP2? And so I think the biggest thing for me as a consumer of APIs is REST APIs, you send a request and a response, you expect a response from the server. And gRPC, you're able to layer in streaming types of requests.
Right. And so by streaming, we're basically saying like we can send multiple packets to the server saying, I want this, I want this, I want this. And the server can send back a single response or it can stream back a number of responses. So I like to kind of compare it to a telephone call. Like if I were to call you and say, hey, Joyce, what's the name of your dog? And you tell me the name of your dog, it's like, okay, cool. And I hang up. And then I call you back and be like, what's the name of your cat? And then I hang up and I call back and what do you name that plant on your windowsill behind you? And I hang up and I call back, and that's a typical restful transaction based where it's a single request, you get a single response, and you hang up. Where with gRPC, it would be like, hey, while I got you on the phone, let me ask you for the name of your dog, the name of your cat, what you call the plant behind you, and so on, and then you can give me all of that information all in one shot.
I think that's a very good like communication because it's like human communication. Like, how does data communicate? I was thinking about this because I feel like you can poke holes in any analogy, but you're Canadian, right?
Yep, I am.
And I noticed that I'm Asian and we have very, very different talking styles. So I think Canadians are really polite. So they say something and then they wait for the other person to respond, right?
True.
And I'm not saying Asians are not polite, but my talking style is like Ian's talking. I'm excited about what he's saying. So I'm talking too. And like we're both kind of talking at the same time.
At the same time.
So Canadian communicate talking style might be more akin to rest, and like Asian familial style of talking might
Yeah,
be more akin to gRPC.
interesting way to think about it too. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Huh.
And I realize that's why you get so irritated when I just talk over you when I'm just excited about
I
what
don't
you're
get
saying.
I don't get irritated. You're
Well,
you're
I
my
mean,
boss. I don't get
yeah, yeah, yeah.
irritated by
Exactly,
anything you do.
exactly, exactly.
Um, Arena was asking in chat gRPC versus WebSocket. So WebSocket tends to be more event driven, where gRPC is still like I am intentionally calling you to get information. And then it's a question of like, am I expecting a single response or am I going to wait for you to send me multiple responses? So we're gonna dive in on some of that. Where WebSocket is more, I would use it more for like event driven. like something has happened and it sort of triggers something else to kind of happen. Is that how you would define WebSocket, Joyce?
I mean, you described it better, but I also can see Arena's confusion is because, like, well, WebSockets, you establish a connection and you have messages going back and forth, right? And with streaming methods in gRPC, you're also opening up a connection, holding it, and then information's
Sure.
traveling. So, I mean, I don't really know the
Well,
answer.
I think the difference with WebSocket though is like you're holding that thing open kind of on purpose. Like it would be like me calling you on the phone and just having a lot of airtime where neither of us are talking. And then suddenly it's like, oh, I also wanted to ask you, like, what was your favorite recipe for cookies? And then you send me that thing where gRPC is very much a, hey, I've got a list of questions I want to ask, and then I'm going to hang up that connection.
Yeah,
Where it's meant to be like I've got a burst of things, and so you make that connection, you get the data, and then you hang up that connection. Where WebSocket is you keep that connection open, but there's a lot of like
downtime.
non-communication that happens while you have that.
It's
The
like
other thing that I re-
if it's like
Go
if
ahead.
we're playing a game and we open up a Discord chat or connection, and then we're just playing the game together, and then occasionally you say something to me, so it's open. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I realized, Joyce, I think based on our age, we're both doing this to talk about phone calls. People probably don't
What
know what
else
this
should you
means.
do? This?
If
This?
it's this, I don't know.
Wait, I like
um,
this.
yeah, right. So Prem was asking, what's the purpose of this meeting? So we're going to do a live stream where we're going to show you how to design a gRPC API inside of Postman, and then show you a little bit of how we do testing a little bit differently in Postman for gRPC APIs over what you might know more of the traditional REST style HTTP. So that's basically where we're going to go with this.
Yeah, Prem, log in if you want to follow along. I think everything we have is going to be forkable, copyable. You'll be able to follow along and actually send your first gRPC requests today.
Yep. So we'll have a handful of links that we're going to drop in chat as we go. Ilan sent a really neat thing here. gRPC is similar to socketing, except packets are in forms of media or blobs are passed, as opposed to WebSockets where messages are used. gRPC still uses the idea of like this is the structure of the message, um, but yeah, I mean, I would say that something like a WebSocket is more, you're holding that connection open with the intent of like eventually we may have something to say to each other. Where gRPC is very much a I want to make a connection so that I can send you a request, you send me back a response, and we're still going to hang. So there's some similarities there. But gRPC, the interesting thing with gRPC is it can be synchronous or asynchronous as well. But we're not really going to go down that rabbit hole today. We're just going to focus on kind of the synchronous portion. All right, well let's dive in a little bit. So Joyce, do you want to share your screen? And we're
It's
gonna
time. Okay.
it's time. We're gonna do the thing. So I'm gonna close chat. But if we do see some questions come in, I'll make sure that we kind of highlight those. And we had a question come in: are there different use cases for REST versus gRPC, or are they mutually exclusive? And my blog post, I think, will cover some of that. So I pasted the link, but I'll drop it in chat again. I did a whole bunch of research on the differences between gRPC and HTTP and why you might want to use one over the other. And I think it's good to kind of educate yourself on the benefits and like the advantages and disadvantages of everything that we use. So you can make the best decision of should I use this technology or that technology? Because there are use cases for either. You could use gRPC. There is one of four ways of transferring data over gRPC, which would be very similar to HTTP based, where it's like we make a connection, I send a single request, I get a single response, and we hang up. The difference with gRPC though is it's using HTTP2, and browsers don't natively support that yet. So if you're writing some JavaScript code, it's not as easy as making like a fetch call in JavaScript, where you can just say go fetch this HTTP based thing over HTTP 1.1. And so it's a little trickier to do gRPC from a JavaScript front end side of things. It can be done. You can do like some proxying and things like that to actually speak over HTTP2. But right now, browser support is not there yet to actually talk HTTP2 through JavaScript code. So you've got to load all these other libraries and kind of proxy your way around how to transfer that data and get a response back.
Yeah. The link that you just dropped, your blog post, I have to say, Ian, that's some of your finest work. It's
Thank you.
very well researched and it's still browsable. So if you are a little bit, Curious. I think point taken. Don't just hop on the gRPC train just because there's a lot of buzz around it. Understand the trade offs between what you already have and what it will take to implement, because it might not be um, smooth sailing right away. And I did learn from TikTok that gRPC, so that's Google Remote Procedure Call. Google didn't invent RPC, but that's their flavor of it. Somebody said there's something called like tRPC. I
Oh,
don't know
really?
what the T stands for, but
I
I
think I've
mean,
heard of tRPC.
there might be other RPCs.
Well, RPC is a technology that's been around since I think the 1970s. It's been around a long, long time. But that was meant for more like you're on the same sort of system and you're kind of calling things. So the idea of like calling that over the internet is still relatively new. I mean, gRPC I think has been around for gosh, a couple of years at least. But I want to say like 2014 or so, if I remember right. The link that I just dropped in chat right now is for the workspace that we're looking at with
Oh,
Joyce.
yeah.
And so you'll be able to fork some of the stuff that's in here. We don't yet allow you to fork APIs inside of Postman, but there are some collections in there that you can take a look at. And you can also see some examples of single file gRPC protos as well as multi-file. And we'll talk about like what a single file and multi proto file and all that stuff. We're going to go through all of that today in our session.
Go to that link. I'm in here by myself. Oh, somebody just joined me.
All right. Um,
Good.
Someone was also asking, where's the spaceman helmet and why is the API down?
John's work
I think,
alias. I didn't know it was down. I have a monitor to make sure my light is up. We did that in a different stream. I'll double check
right.
it after the stream. Thank you for saying hello, though.
Yeah. And Vicus was asking, what are we using to stream the video cast? We use Restream as a platform. And someone else was
Oh,
saying, thank you,
everyone's
Postman,
leaving.
for knowledge sharing. So, I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here to kind of share what we're learning and
Here
kind of
we go.
educate people about APIs and so on. So, yeah, go
Ooh,
check out
oh, our
Go check out
friends.
that link. All right, we got all kinds of folks hopping in here, so definitely check out this workspace. Like I said, there's some things in here that you can absolutely fork. You won't be able to fork the API, but you'll be able to kind of watch what we're doing, and you'll be able to kind of follow along from there. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about what we're going to design, and then I'm going to talk Joyce through what to code and how to sort of build this out. And then we're going to switch into actually building out a collection to call those new endpoints. But we don't have a server, so we don't have the server code. This is what I'm going to be live streaming later on, and I'll drop that link a little bit later. But we're not going to have a server, so how are we actually going to be able to call this collection? We've got some magic happening in Postman that we're going to
I
talk about
know.
as
I
well.
know.
Yeah. So let's start by building a brand new API. So we got all kinds of friends joining us over there in the workspace. So absolutely follow along with us, please. Um, all right. So Joyce, let's start with the APIs. So in the context bar, we're going to click on APIs and we're going to start a new API in here. So you can click the plus sign. Yep. And we're going
Okay.
to create a brand new API from scratch. Again, we're going to be working in version 10. It's going to be a little bit different from version 9. And I'll try to point out some of those differences kind of as we go here.
Is web version 10?
Uh, if you are on version 10 and you're signed into a team which is on version 10, then yes,
Ah,
you will see the version 10 interface. If you haven't yet signed up for the wait list, or your team hasn't been sort of set up for V10, then the web version should still show you version 9.
okay.
All right. So down at the bottom of this screen, so we're not going to import anything from a repository here. So we're not going to pull it in from GitHub. We're going to do this entirely from nothing. So we're gonna click on the link.
What should I call
Oh
it?
yeah, well, let's call it. We're gonna call it like. Uh, well, we're gonna pretend that we're fetching some web assets. So let's call it like I don't know,
Web
web
fetcher.
fetch, web fetcher. Sure, sounds good.
Okay.
And yep, we're gonna continue without a repository. So we'll click
Okay.
on that, and Marc Andre was asking, I'd love to have an access to a recording of this session. Yeah, we'll be putting this up on YouTube. We're actually streaming on Twitch, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and the video will be available on all of those platforms for a little while, but we always put these up on our YouTube channel. And we'll be adding chapter notes, and all the links that we share we'll be putting in the YouTube description as well. All right, so we've built this whole thing. We are not going to connect a repository. So again,
Okay.
we're doing this entirely from nothing. So we're going to click that button at the bottom there. It says create definition. This is where
Okay.
we can tell Postman what kind of API are we going to build. And so we're going to author the definition from scratch. Yep. And this is where we can choose what type of API. Now, a lot of you may be familiar with OpenAPI or Swagger, but we're actually going to use Protobuf version 3. It says it's in beta, but gRPC support is actually out of beta, but the support for Protobuf 2 and 3 is still in beta in the Postman product. But
We
we're
should
going to
do
do
a
this in
future
Proto.
stream on WSDL.
Yeah, we should. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or RAML. I don't think I've done anything in RAML.
Oh,
Um, cool. So
oh,
we're going to do protobuf 3. So the definition format is already fixed. We can't change that. But we're not going to use the boilerplate either. We're going to start completely from nothing. So we can kind of describe what all this stuff is doing as we go. So we're going to leave that off and we're going to say create definition.
Proto, creating definition from scratch.
All right. Well, the first thing that we have to do is we have to tell the parser what kind of file are we doing. So the very first line that we're going to put in here is a keyword called syntax, and we're going to do it like a variable. So we're going to say syntax equals, and then it's going to be a string just called proto3. And the protobuf format, we need semicolons at the end of the line. So we're going to add a semicolon.
It's not optional.
I don't think it's optional. I mean, everything that I've been reading suggests like it's a good idea to put it in there. I think it's like
Okay.
JavaScript where it's a good idea to put it in there, but maybe you don't have to.
You'll get
But depending on
roasted. Yeah.
depending on how you're writing the code and how it's getting parsed and things like that, it's probably a good idea to have it in. Cool. Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need to define what are the endpoints that we're going to call. In order to define an endpoint that we're going to call, though, we have to know what's the structure of the data that we're sending. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing here. Do we define the service first, or do we define the packet of data first? And so I think we're going to start with like a packet of what the data is going to look like. So in order to do that, when we send these packets of data over gRPC, it's called a message. So we're going to make a keyword here called message. And this is basically where we're defining the structure of what this data is going to look like back and forth. So it won't be a variable. It's just a keyword. We're going to say
Oh.
message. And then what do we want to call this structure? So let's just call this asset or something for now. So we'll typically capitalize this as a keyword. So we'll do asset and then open curly bracket. And this is where we're going to define the structure of our message. So we'll need a closing bracket at the end. I like to put the closing bracket in because I tend to forget them when I'm coding. And so inside of these curly braces, we'll hit enter. And on the next line, this is basically where we're going to define the data types of the structure that gets sent over gRPC. Another thing to mention about gRPC is in other APIs that you might be familiar with using JSON format, where JSON format is kind of loosely typed. You can kind of set things to all different types, and you don't have a very strict data type structure. But in gRPC, we will have a strict data type to follow here. So if we define something as an integer, that message has to be an integer, or that portion of the message has to be an integer. We can do nested types, so you can get into very complex structures. We're going to keep it pretty simple today. So what we're going to say here is this is the packet that we're going to send to the server saying, either go fetch this URL or do you have this URL? So it's just going to be a string where we're going to send a URL over to the server. So our data type here is just going to be string. And then we have to
Like
tell
create
it
a
what we,
string or write string.
no, it'll be the keyword string. So we're
Okay.
defining the type.
Ooh, was
And
it
then we
auto
have to give,
completing for me?
is it
Oh,
auto completing or no?
I forgot. How do you do the autocomplete? Is it control something?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, control
I
space.
usually,
Okay.
it says no
Control space is
suggestions
how
right
you
now. So, okay.
syntax? No, string. Okay.
All right. So then we have to give this piece of the structure a name. So we'll just call it like asset URL or something like that. You can do it just like JavaScript camel case or however you want to write it. And what we have to do here in the message is we have to tell it what order these things are coming in. And so this is a little bit quirky about how the prototype file is written, but we're going to say equals one with a semicolon on here. This is basically saying this is the first bit of our message. So this is all we're going to send. So when we tell our server, like, hey, we want you to go fetch this URL, uh, we're just going to send over just the string of the URL. So that's all we're going to need for sending the packet. But we need to now define what is that response? Like, what do we want that response to look like? Back? So let's build another message structure. and we're going to call this like asset response. Now, what you actually call these messages is entirely up to you. I haven't seen a good standard one way or the other to say like, should we write them this way or that way? And so really you can just call these whatever you like. Inside of here, we'll send back like a string or something here that has the asset content. Now, as I mentioned, gRPC actually sends everything over in binary format, and so it actually compresses down quite a lot as it's sending. So it makes it highly efficient. Typically, instead of a string value here, we would set this as a binary value instead. Where if we want to fetch an actual image, we would actually get the binary of that image. In this case, we're just for the sake of simplicity in what we're doing today, we're going to make it a string just so we can actually see the data here. So we'll set this to equal 1.
Oh,
Um, and so when we define these messages, anything after the equal sign is just the order of like the sequence of these
okay.
variable types. The second one that we may send back here, let's add a second one and let's make this a Boolean. So it's just going to be BOOL. So it's a short form of
Cool.
the word Boolean. And we'll just say like whether we already had that asset or not. Like maybe we'll send back like, hey, I already had that asset. So we'll just say, we'll call it like have asset or something and we'll make that equal to. When we actually send this back, like we may actually send back a true or false of like, oh, I had to go fetch that for you, or yes, I already had that in the cache.
So, you were saying that we're doing string or boolean, but a lot of times it's binary, and binary is super compressed, and so that makes it efficient. I've heard that gRPC is 7 to 10 times faster than REST. Is it primarily because of the compression?
Well, you can do compression on HTTP based as well. A lot of HTTP servers will do something called gzip. And so as you're sending the text data, the server will generally compress it and the browser will uncompress it. And the browser sends something back, it'll compress it, the server will uncompress it. But that compression time or the compression algorithms take time to run. And so that's part of the efficiency of gRPC is there's no compression there that needs to happen because everything's already in this binary format as it transfers. So it doesn't have
Right.
to do the compression and decompression. So it does make that a little bit more efficient. Plus, the efficiency comes from what we were talking about with the streaming earlier, where while we've got the communication open, let me send you a whole burst of things that I want you to get, and you give me a burst of that data back, as opposed to like the one at a time sort of call that we would make over HTTP, like for like a RESTful API or a GraphQL API.
Yeah.
Cool. So now that we got these two messages, now we can actually get into defining our service as far as what our server is going to do here. So let's add a new block here. We're going to use a keyword called service. And this is where we're just going to call our service, based on our name. We'll call it like web fetcher or something. And this all needs to be one word, but we can do like a camel case or whatever on it.
Web
Typically
fetcher.
here, we would start it with a capital letter as well. So we would have
Oops.
capital W
Okay.
on this. Now, we mentioned at the beginning of the stream, there are 4 different types of calls that we can make. We've got the typical kind of like single request, single response, and that's what we call a unary request in gRPC. Um, so let's just put that in a comment. So we'll put 2 slashes at the front of this, just so we can kind of define like this is going to be a unary call. So 2 slashes is a comment marker in the Proto file format. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start this with RPC. And then we need to give our function a name of some kind. So this will be a little bit like what endpoint are we calling? But in a RESTful API, you would have all the slashes defining your path. Here we just have like a method name, something analogous to just a method name. So let's call this, fetch asset.
Fetch.
Yeah. And what we do after this is in parentheses, we're going to say these are the parameters that I'm going to send, or this is the message type that I'm going to use for my request. So inside of here, we're going to use asset from line 3. So we're going to say when I call this method fetch asset, I'm going to send my request in this structure that I'm calling asset or that I've defined as asset. Cool. And then after the closing parentheses, what we're going to do is we're
Look,
going to define what
it
we expect the
knows.
server to. Yeah, so it's looking it's doing some autocomplete for us here as well.
Okay,
So
asset.
after the parentheses, we're going to say what we expect this to return. So the keyword here is just returns plural. And again, in parentheses, we have to tell it what message structure we're expecting to get back from the server. And this is going to be our asset response.
Oops. Oh, response.
Yep. And then after this, we just define two curly braces. And then this is
That
saying like, yep, that's all we need. Now, this line of code doesn't have to have a semicolon because this is kind of inside the structure of what we're building out as the service, so we don't need to put a semicolon.
okay, so this
But
looks
now,
weird to me, but we've defined the message asset and message asset response. So we're setting a new endpoint, if you will,
yep,
that is using that's called fetch asset that takes in asset that we've defined up there and returns this asset response. This looks weird to me, but okay.
yeah. And we had a comment from Top Flight here saying gRPC encodes it as binary before sending, which makes it less data, much more efficient without needing to compress. So there is encoding if you're doing something in string format or whatever, it would need to encode that. But if you're just doing like integers and what would typically be more binary format, it's already in binary, so there wouldn't need to be any encoding there. As far as being less data, I think you're right. I mean, that binary structure is going to be less overall data than if you sent it as non-binary, like ASCII data, like a JSON format. But again, a lot of HTTP servers would be doing some kind of like gzip compression on either side, but that compression and decompression takes additional time. So that's where some of the efficiency of gRPC comes in. Cool. Well, we've defined our first endpoint, and we've defined what those message types are going to be. So let's go ahead and save this. So we're going to click that save button.
Okay.
And the interesting thing here, the magic that I kind of alluded to earlier, is Postman actually just spun up a mock server for us. Now it won't show up in the mock servers tab on the left in the context bar. It actually doesn't show up there,
Oh,
but
that
there
would
is
be
a mock
nice.
server. Yeah, there is a mock server up and running, and so we don't need to go create one. But if we go into collections, if we start a new collection here, we'll actually be able to see what to do. No, you don't want to click that plus button.
Ah,
You want to click
okay.
that. Clicking
Let
that
me tell
plus
you what
button
we
will
like.
actually it'll actually put Postman into like HTTP RESTful collection. So what we
Ah,
need to do instead is we need to click that new button at the top.
new. Okay.
Yeah, we want to click on new, and over on the top right corner where it says gRPC request. This is how you build a gRPC collection.
Okay.
So that's the main difference. If you use that plus sign, then it's going to make
So new.
a
Okay.
RESTful type of collection. So you got to click on new, click on gRPC request, and this is how we're going to get into it.
Secrets. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So what we need to do here is we need to just like an HTTP, like a RESTful kind of thing. We need to give it a server URL. But in this case, instead of giving it a path, we actually need to select a method. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click in where it says enter the server URL. We're just going to click in there. Now, in this case, Joyce already had some stuff sort of in cache around like
What's my
gRPC
internet
and
history?
yeah. But what we want to do is we want to pick the option at the end of the list that says select a protobuf API to use instead. So as I mentioned, we kind of spun up a mock server for you automatically here. So we're just going to go ahead and pick that, and it's going to ask us which one. So from the drop down here, it's probably going to find all the protobuf files within this workspace. So we want to make sure that we pick the new web fetcher one.
Web fetcher.
Click on
Okay.
that. And now the interesting thing with this is we've got what we call server reflection, where now in that drop down where it says select a method, um, it's actually going to give us the list of methods that we can call. So in the drop down up above where it says select a method, if we click in here, now we see that
Oh,
endpoint that we defined. And fetch asset is there and it's ready to go. Now the two arrows back and forth, that means I'm sending one request, I'm getting one response. Once we get into the streaming ones, we'll see that those arrows will have like multiple arrows in either direction. That's whether we're sending a burst of data or whether we're receiving a burst of data.
so we configured the service definition to use the API or the gRPC schema that we just defined under the APIs tab. And now we
Right. Yep.
see the method, the one. How come there's no server URL here?
So we'll do that. We'll do that next. So
Okay.
when we went through the server, it said we'll go pick the protobuf like file, but um, we're getting to that next. So once it kind of loaded that protobuf file, it gave us that list of methods that we can call. We only had the one method, But now if you click back inside server URL, we actually see use the mock URL for web fetcher. And so now we can go back and we can tell it
Oh,
we
yeah,
actually
yeah.
want to use that web URL. Now, that web URL, if you've got something else that can do gRPC client requests, you can actually copy that and use it anywhere else. So you've got a mock server, it's up and running, it's available from Postman, the same as any other uh, mock server would be that you would create inside of Postman. This mock server is available to you 24/7. All right, so now that we've got that, how do we actually use this from here? So yeah, let's
Blue
go ahead and
button?
click that invoke button. We're going to get an
Okay.
error because we
Oh,
haven't told it like that we're actually sending anything. So
oh,
the
failed.
interesting, well, the interesting thing here is gRPC doesn't use the same status codes as RESTful APIs. So normally we might have gotten like
Oh.
a 400 series error, but these status codes for gRPC are they kind of started at 0 and they kind of went up from there, and they're all like single digit, or they tend to be single digit. And so this one, status code 9, basically means like you're trying to call this endpoint, but something didn't happen. Like you didn't actually send us something. That's because in the workspace area right above this, where it says compose message, we didn't actually give it any data to the server, and we said, hey, when I call this endpoint, I'm going to
Mm,
send you a message, and I expect a message response. But we didn't actually send anything.
so
So
strict.
yeah, well, I mean, it's by design.
Yeah.
The nice thing about Postman is we got more magic under the hood. Um, right, just if you move your mouse pointer just up a little bit above where it says metadata, is we've got this button that says generate an example message. So based on the structure that you define in that proto file, if you click on that button, it says, "Oh, you want this thing called asset URL, and you wanted that to be a string. So let me just make something up here." So we just generated an example message. So depending, like however you define that structure of that message in your proto file, Postman then is going to generate a message in the format that the server would actually need. So we got a little bit of magic going on here. So and yeah, and every time you click on that, we're just gonna fill it with some Latin or lorem ipsum kind of stuff here. But now we can hit that invoke button. So it's very similar to what you would see as a send button. We can click on that and
Failed.
failed a precondition. Oh yeah.
So it
So
says on the bottom, it says, make sure you're using the correct
valid.
configuration, invalid proto.
You don't have a
No
root
root.
file. So if we go, so we're on the API tab right now. So let's expand open that web fetcher, and this is something with I believe it's version 10, where we now allow you to have multiple files in here, and you can go look at
Cool.
that multi-file one to kind of see what's happening there. But we need to define a starting point for this. Um, well, actually, in that case, we don't have multi-files, but we could show people how to do a multi-file here in a moment. But what we have to do is we have to tell the mock server like this is where we're getting started. So similar to having like a whole bunch of source code files, you have to tell your code where to start, and we need to do the same here. So if you click on the three dots over on the right side, we should be able to click on that and say we want to mark this one as root. That's basically saying this index.proto file starts everything else. And so if we have multiple files, this is the one where we're kind of
Oh.
starting everything. And so we have to mark one of them as root. Otherwise, it doesn't know which of these files do you want me to start in. Now, one piece of feedback, if Sterling's paying attention, if we've only got one file in there, it'd be nice to auto mark that
Assume
one.
it's root. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like the convention. It's is it a Postman convention then that you could call this like app.proto or something like that, and like Postman won't know unless you mark it as root.
right. That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. When you're actually building out a server or you're generating code or documentation or whatever based on your proto file, you would be telling it which file to start with. So similar here, we have to tell the Postman mock server like kind of where to get started with this. So now that we've
Okay.
defined that,
So
yeah, go
ready?
ahead. Yeah, so now that we've defined that root file, if we hit that invoke button, now we get
Yay.
a response message back. So that response message, we had a string and we had a Boolean value. So we could imagine that that asset content was actually the content of that asset, and the Boolean of like, did we already have that or not? In this case, it automatically generated a false. I bet if you click that a bunch of times, it might toggle over to true. Right? There's a
True.
fifty-fifty chance there.
50% of the time. Yeah.
But we can also see the timing on here. Like it took about 350 milliseconds for the mock server to go
Oh.
generate that example response and send it back. So the difference here with a mock server with gRPC, if you build up a mock server with like a RESTful endpoint or a GraphQL endpoint, you basically say, if I send you this exact message, you're going to give me back this exact response. Where with our gRPC mock server, it's a little more fluid, saying if I send you a structure that looks like this, you're going to send me a structure back. But everything's kind of like, okay, well, it doesn't have to be exactly this string. And what I send you back isn't going to be exactly this as the response, but I'm going to send you back that structure as a response. So that's one difference with this, and that's why the mock server on the gRPC takes a little bit longer because on our side, we're actually generating these strings or we're
Yeah.
generating these values before we send that packet of data back to So we got a handful of other questions here. Someone's asking, can we make the mock server private and enforce an API key? That's a good question. I don't know if the mock servers can be made private. I think, I mean, as long as you don't share it, I mean, it's a pretty random sort of URL. Um, it would be very difficult to guess. I don't know that you can actually make it private though, because it needs to be publicly available in order for you to hit it over the internet. As far as enforcing an API key, you can certainly set an environment. That was another question that we had come in. Can we make this use an environment? So up in the top right corner, we still see no environment set. We could tell it to use an environment. We could save this URL in an environment and then toggle between environments for calling like a production gRPC as well as our development, or in this
Hey,
case, a mock environment.
Ian, I think your mic is only picking up when you're speaking like the loudest. So when
Oh,
you,
okay.
yeah. Oh, that's perfect. Crystal clear.
Is it
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So sorry, I think that the question here was actually asking how can we set an environment variable
From the
from the response?
response. Yeah.
So we'll get into the testing here as far as like how we actually read the response and how we can get data out of that if you want to store something in the
It's an
environment.
excellent question, Dimitro.
Yeah, great segue. So let's talk about how we do testing in gRPC. In HTTP based, we would actually see a tab across the top of our workspace that says tests or pre-request. But now we've kind of embodied all of that in this tab called scripts. So let's click on scripts. And what we see here is before invoke and after response. And so it's a little clearer like we're going to do this block of code before we invoke this call. And
Oh,
after the response comes back, this is the code that's going to run.
that's really nice because pre-request scripts and
Yes.
tests, people think, oh, tests. Well, I didn't know I could write a script there. So this is very clear. I like that.
Yeah. My understanding is that uh, I don't want to like commit the team, but I think that we were going to do this before after type of interface on the other one as well at some point in the UI, but I don't know for sure. But I think it would be great if we did because I think it's definitely more clear as far as like the intention of what we're doing inside here. Cool. Well, just like our HTTP, we have snippets of code that we can do in here. And again, these snippets are going to be specific to what's going on. And so we've got things like go get a global variable, set an environment variable, and so on. And so we've still got access to our environment. We can make collection based variables. We can make global variables. All those snippets and all those Postman library things are still the same. But if we scroll down inside here a little bit, we're going to see, oh, did we freeze or just me? Let me know in chat if you still see me. I think we either I'm frozen or Joyce is frozen. All right, I'm still here. I think we lost Joyce. All right. Will the recording be available? Yes, this will be up on YouTube later on. You'll be able to watch this again on LinkedIn and Twitch. We'll store those videos on demand for a little while. You can watch them live on, or not live. You can watch them after the fact on their platforms. Um, the but all these videos get stored on YouTube. And we'll be adding chapter notes. We'll be adding all the links that we do. We'll be doing those on YouTube kind of as we go. All right. So it looks like we lost Joyce. So we'll wait for Joyce to come back. Um, so what we're going to do here is we're basically going to walk through what the snippets of code are going to do in that gRPC API. So while we wait for Joyce, let me see if I can pull up my thing over here. So thankfully, with synchronization and team synchronization and so on, we can actually see, or I can actually see the work that Joyce was doing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll kind of resume where we left off with Joyce. So we have our definition over here. Let me go back over to that window. So we have our definition. Everything that we had over here is still saved. And then in our collection, we started our new, uh, well, so here's another thing that's a little bit different. Um, we started a collection endpoint with Joyce, but we hadn't actually saved it. So I don't actually see that in here. So I'm going to go recreate what Joyce just did. So again, I'm going to click on this new button. And from inside here, I'm going to click on gRPC request. And then I'm going to follow the same kind of step here. So when I click inside the server URL, because I don't know that mock server that we made, I'm going to say I want to select a protobuf API. It's going to ask which one. I'm going to pick our web fetcher that we just made. So I'm just walking back through these steps that we just did with Joyce. And so this is the API that we were going to use. So now from the drop down, I can say I want to pick the method, and we're going to use that fetch asset. And then for the web server URL, we're going to use the mock server that we previously generated. So now we can hit that invoke, and in this case, we actually got a response back here. Now, in the message that we sent over, we actually didn't generate a sample message, but every time we hit that invoke, we see different text coming back here as our response. So let me know if the font size on this is okay, or I can maybe zoom in a little bit more if you need. So from here, what we're going to do is we were going to talk about testing. So we're going to start in the scripts area here. And again, we've got the before and after. Again, I really like this interface where it's a little more clear. Like this code is happening before you call the request, and this is happening after we get the response back. So the before invoke, this would be a good place where you can do like, I want to do a PM variables.get or something where I want to fetch a global variable, or I want to do something like PM environments.get, where I'm going to go get an environment variable and do some sort of like pre-request script similar to what we might have done in the HTTP based RESTful APIs. But in this case, we're just going to look at the after response. What I was going to talk through though are these different snippets that we have. So again, we saw that the status codes were a little bit different with gRPC. In this case, a status code of 0 means everything worked properly. So when we got this successful response back, we actually see over here that the status code came back as 0 okay. That means everything worked out. So again, this is a little bit different over an HTTP RESTful or GraphQL type of response where we're using HTTP 1.1, where we would get an HTTP 1.1 status code of like a 200 series is okay, a 300 is going to be kind of your redirect and utility responses. 400 means the client did something wrong. 500 means something went wrong on the server. The status codes with gRPC are a little bit different. And so we can't have a status code of 200. All right, looks like we got Joyce back.
Well, that was sad.
Welcome back.
What did I miss?
Oh, I was just recapping and sort of showing my interface, and I was just getting into the snippets again. So I had to go in
Okay.
and I had to create the collection
Oh
uh,
no, because I didn't
again.
save.
You didn't save, but there's also something a little bit different here. So, what I wanted to show in the interface is if I try to save this, um, if we go over to collections, it actually didn't save anything over here. There's no structure of where we want to save this collection request. So now when we hit the save, the first thing it's going to do is say, what do we want to call this? So I'm just going to call this like fetch an asset. And we have to tell it which collection we want to put it into, or do we want to make a new collection? So in this case, I'm going to make a new collection, and I'll just call this like I'll name it after our web fetcher. I'm going to click the create button here, and then it enables our save button in this dialog that comes up. So I'm going to go ahead and save that request. So now Joyce will see that on her side. Joyce, do you want to go back and share your screen, and we'll continue to walk through? Or
Sure, sure.
yep. Okay. All right. So we'll give Joyce a moment. All right. So let me pull up Joyce's screen here. There we go.
Wait, so
All
this
right.
is where I left off last time. Can I close this now?
Yeah, you can go ahead and close it, and it'll ask if you want to save, and you can just say no. And then
Don't
if you go
save.
over to collections, you should see the web fetcher collection that I
Oh,
made.
there it is.
And inside of there, it's
Oh,
fetching our asset. So that
oh.
was the one that I just made that I saved. So
And you
while the
added a script. Very nice.
I
Okay.
had yeah. So I was showing folks like while we were waiting for you to connect the new different kinds of snippets that we've got in here. So we can check for things like response time. So a lot of these snippets are going to have a similar name to what you might have seen if you've done other API testing
Oh,
inside of Postman. But the structure of what we're looking at here is going to be a little bit different.
trailer.
Um,
Metadata.
yeah. So there's some new things in here for sure. So up near the top, there's one that I want to kind of focus on. and that's basically test that the message exists or test that a message exists with specific properties. So we're going to click on about the sixth one down. We're going to look for the message with specific properties. So what's going to happen here is this would be very similar to like a RESTful API where you tell it that you want to sort of deserialize the JSON response back into like an object structure and you want to test that your object has a particular parameter in it. This is how we do the same thing in gRPC. So again, we're sending these blocks of data back and forth called messages. And so what we're doing here is I expect that the message to come back has a key with a particular name. Now it's a little bit misleading here because we see key value. But what we're looking for
The
here is
key
that we
name,
actually have a key of a particular name. So in this case, we wanted a name parameter to come back called asset URL.
capital,
And it was lowercase a for asset, and I think it was camel case with URL where the U was capitalized and the RL was lowercase, if I remember right.
okay,
So let's go ahead and click the invoke button. Let's just see if this test passes for us. So one of them failed. So let's go look at that. So in this case, the key didn't come back the way that we thought it would. So we're basically saying I expect that the messages that come back to include a key called asset URL. Oh, we call it asset content. So
asset
there we go.
content.
So we know that our testing works. All right. So
Meant
if
to
we
do
invoke
that.
this now both of our tests. Oh,
Uh-oh.
something else failed. Uh-oh. Asset content didn't work. Why didn't that work?
Messages to include key. Let's look at this.
So it is asset
Asset
content.
content. Do I need a save?
You shouldn't need to save because this is still just testing. Like, did the test even run?
Should
So
we look at the
everything that we
proto?
type in here, um,
Well,
well,
it's
we can look
there.
at the proto, but we actually see the response come back.
Yeah.
So we see that that should exist here. Um, yeah.
Do we think
Let's
it's
just
the
go back over
value
here.
maybe? Or we
Well, because we don't know what the value is. Let's change it to have asset, um, and we'll see if we can just test for that Boolean
I
value.
know how to invoke the same response so that it comes back as ipsum. Try this.
Sure, let's try it. So this is part of our learning in public. Nope, it also did not work.
To include key have asset. Is it trying to say the whole thing? Should it
Well, we're
just
only
be
getting
have asset?
um no, I don't think so. Unless we change the key to be have asset and the value comes back as true or false. But I thought this snippet was only looking for the structure of the data. That it wasn't
The
actually interpreting
property.
the data. Yeah, that would be more of a property. Let's go see if there is a snippet for like an actual property value. So that one that we clicked on, it was just looking for specific properties, but uh, not a particular value. All right, let me go double check our documentation on that one.
Well, so my hypothesis is if I don't look for a specific property and just do have asset, that should pass, right? If I just make instead of making it a object here. I wonder if this is a
Um,
bug. Have you uncovered a bug?
I don't know. I don't think so,
Let's see.
but we'll double check.
User error, probably.
All right, so let's do this. So we can change this where we can
Oh no,
say
it's not.
we um,
Be
on
an
line
object.
six. On
Oh
line
yeah.
six,
Okay. Let me undo.
we're gonna change this line of code a little bit. We're gonna say pm.response.message, or sorry, pm.response to have message, and each of those words is separated by a dot. So PM response to have message. Now this is going to expect an exact response back from the server. So if we go look at the response that we had here, so in this case we could actually build out this whole thing as the key and the value. I think that might have been what we were missing before, where it actually had key and values. We're not giving it the name of the key. We actually need to tell it the key is called have asset. In this case, we would say have asset to be true, and we would set another one. So it doesn't need to be in quotes here. and we'll set this to a true or false value, but it's going to fail based on what the mock server kind of generates for us. So this is one downside to using the mock server here. If
No,
we invoke
I know how to make
we
it return the predictable response.
Do you know how to
Okay,
do that?
so it failed. Well, it's still not.
Well, it failed because we didn't give it the entire message structure. We said
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
we expect the message to
Precise.
only
Yeah.
have the structure of have asset,
Okay, well,
but
let's
we've
do
also
it.
got
Let's
this
do it
other.
like this.
Okay, so let's just paste that in there. But
Okay.
every time we call this, the mock server is going to generate something a little bit different. So the string content here might not be the same.
Yes, I can help. I can help. This is the part I
Okay,
do know. So
all
when
right,
you're working with the mock server, there's this tab here called metadata that you can set as part of the request or here. And here we're looking for seed. This is like having a little unique identifier for the mocks to match on.
right.
So if we add this little seed guy to metadata up here,
And again, this is Postman specific. So this is us telling our mock server we want you to use this seed when you're randomly generating.
correct. However, you could similarly have built into your own API logic some sort of matching system. If this query parameter comes in this way, here's what returns and that kind of thing. So theoretically, we should return the same response. And theoretically, we should have a passing test.
Well, what else is in that metadata on the response?
Okay, let's
Here's
look.
what these other things are. So we had the content type, we see the seed, we see a request ID and a date. So these are just headers that are coming back. So what gRPC calls metadata, you would typically be calling headers as part of like a RESTful API.
Oh,
Cool.
okay.
Well,
So
let's go invoke this. Let's go send this one over.
let's
I'm
see.
also curious, Joyce, if Control Enter or Command Enter will actually hit that invoke button instead of clicking on
Okay, sorry. Control
it. Control
Enter?
Enter, because you're on a Windows machine. Try Control Enter. Does that actually send that over? Nope.
No.
Okay. So that's something else that might have changed in the interface here. So let's go ahead and click on that invoke button.
I did mix up my pull some keys and remap them accidentally, so maybe it might work on your machine, but
So John is basically saying the seed in this case it's similar to the X mock response ID that we would see in RESTful APIs. With the RESTful mocking, we can actually like kind of by default you can say when I send this exact data over, I expect to get this exact response back. Where you would save the response that you got back as an example.
oh yeah.
And so the
Let's
difference
try
here
that.
is that our mock server is actually generating these things.
Well, that's a
It,
good hypothesis. So what we
yeah.
did was we added the same seed under metadata, and you might have missed it, but I invoked it and I returned the same exact response, and so that's why we have a passing test. So I can invoke, and the same thing comes back here. But what if I change the payload? Yes, it's just
It's
matching on
sti-
the seed.
yeah. So it's only looking at the seed value. Yep. So we had another good question: is an autosave feature coming in Postman in the near future? I don't know of one, but you're absolutely welcome to submit that as a feature idea.
No,
I
don't. I don't
personally
want autosave.
I
That's
love
dangerous.
autosave, especially in
Oh,
my code editor. If I'm like changing up my tab, that it'll autosave
oh,
things because you can
when
always
you lose
undo changes.
focus. Yeah.
Yeah, it would definitely be a nice feature to have. Cool. So we've built a single endpoint, and this is just a single request response, very similar to what you would see in a RESTful API. And we've added a test that says make sure the structure kind of comes back. So we've kind of done like schema contract testing as part of this test, and it's all kind of built into these snippets. We just had to tell it what the structure of that message was going to look like when it was coming back. Cool. So we've gotten started here. Let's go back to our proto file. Let's add another endpoint type, and let's talk a little bit about the streaming data or the streaming nature of what gRPC does. So let's
Okay,
just
should I
add like
save?
one. Yeah, let's go ahead and save that for sure.
Okay.
Um, and then what we're going to do here is we're going to add a streaming endpoint. We're just going to do one where like maybe our client is sending like a whole bunch of things over and we get like a single response back. Like we'll do this as if it was like here's a whole bunch of assets to go fetch and just give me back like a job ID. And then maybe later we'll do like, okay, here's the job ID, give me back all the assets. So we're gonna do, yeah, we'll do an endpoint here. fetch lots of assets. So in this case, we would need to give it. We want to give it the asset URL, but we want to give it a whole bunch of these. So we want it to use the asset message type from line 3, but we need to add a new keyword ahead of it here where we say stream space asset. And what this is signaling to the server is that I'm going to send you a whole stream of these messages, and I expect to get a single response back. Now, the
Okay.
response that we'll get back here, let's say we're just going to get like a worker response. So we'll just call this like worker response, which we haven't defined yet. So we'll define that next. And yeah, we just need those curly brackets. So let's go add that as a message type. And that worker response, we'll just make it like an integer, like a job ID or something like that. So inside of here, we'll do like an int 64 as our data type. Yeah, I always
I,
forget those closing
I
brackets.
remapped
So we're gonna
my
do
keyboard.
we'll do a 64-bit integer here. So it's just int64, and we'll just call it like job ID or something like that. And then we need to do like equals 1 because that's the sequence of the how these sort of show up in that message. So that's all we need here. So let's go ahead and hit save on that.
Okay.
And then if we go back to our collection, we're going to go make uh, another endpoint. So if we, so what I'm curious about here, let's try this. On the web fetcher folder, if we tell it to make another request, so let's click on the three dots. If we add a request here, notice now we have a little pop up that says, I want to make a gRPC request. So now that we have that collection saved, the interface changed up a little bit for us here. And again, this might be a V10 change over V9. But now that we've got a gRPC request collection, this interface changed a little bit. So we want to make another gRPC request.
That would be cool to have a collection that had a mishmash of different protocols,
Yeah, for
though.
sure.
Okay.
Yep. Cool. Well, we've already got the and we'll call this like fetch multiple assets or something like that. Now the server URL, because we've already told it that we've got this proto file made and the mock server already exists. If we click in the server URL, we should immediately be able to pick the mock server. Oh, it doesn't. It still needs us to actually specify which one. So let's go ahead and pick our web fetcher again. I thought it would have automatically picked that one again for us.
Okay.
Cool. And then for our method, what we're going to see here is on the method, we're going to see those arrows change. So notice the one pointing up, like what I'm uploading to the server, there's like multiple sort of carrots on that arrow. And that sort of lets us visually see that I'm expected to send multiple things and then get a single response back.
Did we name
So
this
we're
properly?
fetch lots of assets.
Is it
Uh,
send loss of assets?
um, yeah, because technically we're not actually fetching all of the assets. We're more just
Wait,
sending.
let's change that. That's inaccurate. Let
All
me
right,
save this just in case I lose internet.
sounds good.
And then we go back to the proto and we're going to rename instead of fetch lots of assets, it's going to be send.
Yep. Yeah, we'll call it like send lots of assets. Sure.
Okay, so save it. And now when we come back here, okay, it's called send lots of assets. Okay.
So we had
Because
another question come in. Sorry, go ahead, Joyce.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say someone else asked a question. Is it possible to build a send request method for gRPC similar to other API types? I don't know that we have a snippet for actually making another call. I don't believe that we can right now. That would be an interesting one to run by the team. So if
In the
Sterling
schema?
Well, no, like they're asking within the test code. So like in a RESTful API in the test code, you can say like while this is running, like go make another call and come back and like
I
handle
see.
that response as well. I think they're asking, can we do a similar thing in gRPC? I don't know that we can because when we're setting up the structure of the call, we're telling it which message structure types to use, and
You
I
want
don't
to
think
try
that
it?
the I mean, yeah, I
Do we
mean,
have
we could
time?
try it.
Okay, should I be on fetch asset or send lot? Probably fetch asset.
We'll do send lots of.
Send lots. Okay. So,
Cool.
Miss
So
Isle, this is for you. Let's see. So you're talking about PM send request, right?
yeah. And Someone was asking, how do the servers know when the stream ended and should return the response? So we're gonna talk about that when we send this data over.
Oh yeah, we're still in the middle of a thing. Let me stop this for a second. Let's finish our thought.
Yeah.
All right.
So we're gonna send over our response here, or our request. So let's click over on message, and this is where we can generate an example message. But notice because we've got this streaming type, um, over to the right, so where the button says generate example message, if we move over to the right from there, we see a button that says end streaming. So what we can do here is we can invoke this. So go ahead and click invoke, generate a new example message. So generate example message and then send, hit the send button over on the right. Yep. And then we can generate another example message or just change this to whatever and we'll send that. Once we click the end streaming button,
Should I click
that's
it?
what signals, yeah, that's what signals that as a client, like I'm done sending you data. In which case we see the response back from the
Oh,
server saying your job ID is 13. And so when you're building out your gRPC code, you can say, hey, I've got this bundle of data that I want to send. I'm going to transmit all of that. And I'm going to send you a signal that says I'm all done sending. Otherwise, the server is going to be there going, what else you got? What else you got? What else you got? Until the client actually sends a signal saying, I'm all done sending my
end
request,
streaming. Yeah.
only at that point is the server going to respond. So in that way, it's kind of the polite, Canadian conversation of, "Hey, Joyce, let me ask you 5 questions. You give me back, and then I say, okay, I'm all done with my questions, and then you send me a single response or a streamed response of, here's the answer to question one, here's the answer to question
Mm.
two, and now I'm all done giving you answers." And so when in gRPC with the streaming methodology, either end will say, "I'm done sending you my streamed data for now," and then that gives the other side permission to then respond from that point. So great question on that. I had to look that one up myself because I was a little bit unclear as well. Like, how does it know that I'm
How does it
sending 5
know?
things or 10
Yeah.
things? Cool. So we just built a streaming endpoint now. And again, our mock server is all up and running and doing all this magically for us based on the proto file and based on the message types that we've defined in here.
Can we just really quickly create another one, the one where the arrows go the opposite way?
Yeah, sure thing. And real quick, we had a question. If gRPC is 7 to 10 times faster than REST, does that make gRPC a competitor for REST, or is it likely to become one in the future? Right now, gRPC is mostly used for microservices within an organization and not really a public facing API. Most of the APIs that we see that we can publicly access over the internet are going to be RESTful or like GraphQL or WebSocket based. Where gRPC, there's not a lot of public facing gRPC APIs right now. It would be nice if there were. I think it would overall it would kind of lower the amount of internet traffic and processing time because of the compression decompression that we talked about. I don't know that it's really a competitor. There are
Yeah.
advantages and disadvantages to using both, and I kind of outlined those in my blog post, which you can go check out. I can drop the link again if people want the link, um, because there are advantages and disadvantages to both. Like not everything is ready infrastructure wise for HTTP 2 for gRPC to work properly,
Yeah.
and so I think it's going to be a while before we see widespread adoption as far as public facing gRPC APIs.
Yeah, so like if a lot of people use REST with web APIs and like browsers don't support HTTP2, then you're going to be waiting around for a while before gRPC can be used for some of those scenarios. Good question though.
Now we did mention like there are sort of like proxy libraries and things like that that you can load in JavaScript to sort of uh, emulate talking over HTTP 2 in order to call a gRPC API. But it again, you're putting more load on the client to actually go load those libraries and do that work. So right now we're not quite there yet. So let's go build another endpoint. So let's do one where we send back that job ID and we get back the list of assets. So we're
Do
gonna
you want
do.
to build an endpoint? Okay.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so
Um,
what do we call this one?
so we're gonna call this one. Let's call it like uh, fetch job assets or something like that.
Okay, wait, hold on. Just to be accurate, this is client streaming, right? Because we're
Yep. And
sending a
this,
lot of assets.
yep. And this will be server streaming. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna send back that job ID, and we're gonna expect a stream of data back from the server for each of those things that we were requesting.
I forgot what you said. Is it similar to fetch lots of assets?
Yeah. Um, yeah, we'll do it based on that. So the message type that we want to give it here is going to be we want to give it just a structure of a job ID. So we can actually use the worker response message because
Oh,
all we're going to be sending over is that same structure of a single integer. So let's dry up our code and reuse that structure of data.
so dry.
And what we can get back as a return is we can get a stream of asset response because we've already got that message. So, you know, what is the content? And did we already have that thing or not? So we've already got those messages. We might as well reuse them.
What's so
All right.
easy, so
So
dry.
we didn't need to build anything other than like a single line of code. And now we've got this whole definition ready to go
Okay, so
for
we
server side
save,
stream. So we'll save that.
go
We're
back
gonna
to
go
our
build another.
collection.
Yep. So on the web fetcher folder, we're gonna click on the three buttons and say add a request. We're gonna pick gRPC and we'll call this fetch many assets or something like that.
Oh,
Well,
yes,
in this
let's call
case,
this one and then update the name for the other one.
yep,
This one we changed to send.
good idea.
Does, does this bug you that one is multiple and one is many?
Yeah, it, I'm,
Okay.
it's kind of the nature of what we do is like how do we name things appropriately that it's easy to identify what's going on. So yeah, so again, we pick the API, and now we can put in the mock server and our method. Now we're going to pick the other one. And notice the arrows are pointing the other way. We're saying I'm sending one request and I'm getting multiple responses back. So again, visually, we can kind of see with those arrows like what the expectation is here. So we'll go ahead and pick fetch lots of assets. Now in this case, our message, we're going to send over that job ID. So we'll generate that. And
It
notice it's just looking
knows.
for that integer. It just
Yeah.
happens to know. What's interesting
Okay.
here, though, in that message structure is we said that job ID was going to be an integer, but it actually put quotes around the number.
Did we do it wrong?
Nope.
Int. Yeah.
Just something in that message generator is actually turning it into a string of a number instead of actually sending it
Oh,
over.
interesting. Okay.
Curious
Well.
whether it would actually work without the quotes. But let's do an invoke here.
Oh,
And
oh,
what we see is
oh.
we get a whole bunch of responses back. And so what we're doing on the mock server is we're saying, oh, you want a stream of these things? I'm just gonna like I think it picks five as a number. It says I'm gonna send you back five of the thing. But what's interesting is it generated a single sample and it sent that five times. So it's not
Oh.
giving you five unique things back, but it is saying like here's the like the structure of all of this matches the structure of our asset response, but the server generated a single one and then just sent that back multiple times.
So
And it's
let's
just to
see
alleviate some of the load on our mock server.
if we make this. Do we think this will work?
Let's try it. I hope it'll work because it should be an integer, not a string. Let's try it. Yep, that worked.
Not so strict. Well,
Sure.
it's not so strict. Okay. Yeah, and it's
Um,
all the same. Okay.
so we had kind of a long question here. Is there any option within Postman to generate language specific code if we import proto definitions from a local directory repository, or do we have to run the code generation command manually? Within the Postman, because we're using the mock server, generating the example message is basically going to use that structure. Although I think it would work whether you were accessing a mock server or not, because I think what you're asking is how can we generate a message to send over as part of this collection request, where we're defining a little bit more, but really we're just defining the structure of the data. So it's kind of specific to your question here, it's kind of language agnostic. So whether you're doing Python or Go or Rust, it doesn't matter. The structure of this message is going to be the same that we're invoking to actually send over to the gRPC server. So whether you're accessing a mock server or a real server shouldn't matter. And so in that case, the programming language that you're using shouldn't matter as well, unless you've got something more specific, like maybe if I'm misunderstanding your question. But from what I'm seeing here, if you're importing proto definitions from a local directory or repository, either way, you're defining the structure of the message, saying this field is an integer, this one's a boolean, this one's a nested type of another object, and so on. We're defining that in the proto file or multiple proto files, and so there's nothing really programming language specific.
Ian, do we
Hope,
have
hope I
time?
answered
Can
that
I
correctly.
Can I try to add one more method on my
Yeah,
own? Okay, let me
yeah. You
test
want to do
myself.
you want to do the you want to do the bidirectional?
We'll see. We'll see, and I'll try to keep it dry because I don't know how to write the proto file.
That's
So
okay.
okay, so you said go to the three dots, and I'm going to add a request. We'll add gRPC request.
Well, you haven't made the method yet, or did you make a
Oh
method?
my god, I forgot. Okay, hold on. I
So
closed that.
so we can't
Oh, it's
yeah
there
we
already. Okay.
can't call the request unless we have the method. Let's go
Okay.
back to our
So
proto.
we go to the definition
So
and
before you type anything,
yeah. Oh yeah.
let's
Yeah.
let's design what it is that you want to send here. So
Design. Okay.
let's do kind of a combination of line 18 and line 24. Like I want to send you a stream of assets and I want to get back a stream of what those assets
Okay. So this one is going to be called.
are. Bidirectional stream. So these are the four types that we talked about at the beginning of the session. These are the four different types of method calls that are sort of how we send data back and forth with gRPC.
So hopefully you can see on the screen maybe some clues as to how to do it, but we're going to send a bunch of stuff and receive a bunch of stuff, right?
That's the plan. What do you think we need to do, Joyce?
So, I mean, I think we cobbled together client streaming with server streaming.
Okay,
Do we think? I mean,
that works for me. Yeah. But we're gonna have to
so
give it
we're
a unique name, though. We can't give it the same method name, so we'll have to change
okay.
it. Well,
um,
let's just call it like batch assets or something like that.
well, that's a good word. Batch assets, where we stream asset message type, and then we returns. Oh, it's like that guy from the Lord of the Rings. And then we returns asset response. Do we think
Okay.
that'll work?
I don't know. Do you think it'll work? I think it looks fine to me. I think it looks good to me.
Okay. Let's save.
Okay.
Oh no, am I losing
Oh,
connection?
thinking about it.
Oh no,
Oh,
am I losing
no,
connection?
you're still connected.
Okay, okay.
You're still connected. But as things go with live demos, there's always
Oh,
a
let's
risk that
try.
the team's updating something on their side.
Here, let me copy this to my clipboard just in case I wipe it, but save. Then I can always refresh the thingy, don't you think?
Yeah, you should be able to.
It's thinking real hard. It's because I made it. I bet I messed something up.
Well, I mean, either way, you would have been typing it whether I told you to type it or not. So it might just be
Actually,
something
can you
on.
type it? Can you type it and then save it and then it'll be there?
I can
Maybe it's
try.
my connection.
Well, I don't think so because if your connection was bad, we wouldn't be having a conversation.
I mean, maybe it's
Um,
my connection to the Postman servers.
so I'll do Ian's.
No, make it Joyce's because I wrote it. Just kidding.
Right.
Come on. Let's
I wanted to specify that this is what Ian typed versus
oh
what Joyce typed. So RPC, and we're going to call it batch assets,
batch assets.
and we're going to do the streamed asset as our request. We do returns stream response as the return. Saved that just fine. So it's saved on my side. Okay. So there's the Joyce's bidirectional. So that was what I typed. So it's
Oh,
saved
nice.
on worked on my machine. So let's go over to our collection.
Okay, collection. I already accidentally created this new one. Let's call this batch.
What do we call it? Batch asset.
Okay. And then service definition, select web fetcher schema, proto file. And then
Now
here
we
we'll
import our mock
use the
server.
mock URL. And then there it is, double arrows.
There's the multi arrow in both directions. So
Pew
now it's
pew.
going to expect us to
Assets.
send over multiple things, and we get multiple responses.
So how do we
So,
send multiple things before we establish? Well, let's see.
so we generate one, we invoke it, and
Whoa, whoa,
now we
whoa.
can.
Oh, it
But
immediately.
that's the nature of it, though. We sent one thing, and we got a batch back. So let's generate more example messages and send those over. Or you can just click
Oh,
that blue
so
send button. Just
Ian,
click that blue send button.
when I invoked, I didn't send yet. I just
Invoke
opened the
does do a send.
connection.
Invoke does does the initial send though.
Where's my
So it's at the very bottom
payload?
of the response. It sent a request and then it got a response back. Oh no, no metadata was sent. Um,
I would have
so
expected to see an up arrow. with
Yeah,
this
that's true.
code?
Yep, that's a good question. Oh, actually, we got a status code of canceled. Oh, because you canceled it.
Cancel. I did?
Yeah, you hit the cancel button in order to do this. Cool. Well, let's just invoke it. Let's invoke it
Okay.
one time.
Let's clear message. Oops, I can't clear. What? Whoop whoop.
Okay. So let's clear that out, and we'll just send over like a batch, and we'll get a batch back. So now you can just click that blue send button a bunch of times,
Okay.
and we see a whole bunch of them going over. And now when we click end streaming, that's us telling the server, "Hey, we're all done sending you data." And then we should see. Do we see the responses coming back? It didn't send us any responses back. Interesting.
The last well, so what if it just chooses one or the other? Because
Well, it
the
doesn't
first time
choose. I think what's happening on the mock server is when we hit that invoke button, we're sending a single example message as well as the end stream. And so maybe the mock server is like, well, here's what you wanted back. So that when we're sending more, saying, well, here's more data, we've already kind of stopped the connection at that point. So we might have found a bug here.
so let's
Well,
save this and then clear it. Try it one more time. So we have this. Let's generate a new example payload. Bidirectional streaming. Establish the connection, invoke, and send
yeah, but
potentially.
see, we got a whole bunch of responses right away. So I have a feeling that what's happening here is when we hit invoke, is it's sending over that first example message as well as an end streaming marker, which it shouldn't.
Ah,
I think
okay.
we might have found a bug here. So we'll talk to the team about it because we should be able to send over multiple things and then say
Yeah.
I'm done and then get a bunch of responses back. Cool.
Stream asset.
Really
Yeah.
quick, let's talk about how to do multi-file
What?
protofile.
Okay.
So up at the top of this, we kind of have all of those messages defined. What I'd like to do is I'd like to move these messages into another file. So this file only has the service definition, and we have another file with our messages. So in our API builder here, where we have our definition, let's go over to definition. We want to add a new definition file in here. So let's click on those three dots, and I want to add a file. And I'm just going to call this one like messages.proto. Now, inside of here, we need to define the syntax of this to also be proto3. So we're going to do the syntax equals proto3. Proto3 is going to be in quotes, so we need a semicolon after that. And then what we're going to do from our index proto is we're going to move the message definitions into this file. So let's just grab those messages and we're going to cut them out of here. And we're going to paste them in the other one. But what we have to do is we have to tell our index file to go import this messages file. So in our index proto, we're going to add a new line in here that tells it that we want to import the other file. So uh, right after the syntax, we'll do it right after syntax. We're going to add a keyword that says import, and we just give it a string. Now the string can use a path, um, but in this case, we didn't make a folder structure for our protofiles, but we could make multiple folders if you've got like if you really want to structure out how you
A
build out your
relative
profile.
URL.
Kind of, yeah. It's kind of it's a relative path basically. So
Okay.
if you want to make multiple protofiles and structure them into files, then you can basically set your import path here. So in this case, our import, we don't need a dot or anything. We can just say we should just be able to say messages. Cool. So let's go ahead and save that. Now, if we go back to any of our endpoints, and we just it didn't save again. Oh, it did save.
No,
Cool.
no, no.
Sweet.
So I'm just saying the reason why. So this is kind of like having functional function. What's it called? Like components. You
Yeah,
have like the
exactly.
composable elements, and you could have theoretically like services or something like that. And then index is our root, and that's why we're importing those files into the root,
Yeah, so
right?
very similar if you've got like a really long source code file in most programming languages, it allows you to split them up into multiple files, but you've got to be able to tell it like how to access that other code. That's
Okay.
basically what the import is doing here. So let's go back to just any of those endpoints in our collection. Let's just do the single fetch and asset. We'll send that one over so we don't have to worry about the streaming. Let's just go invoke that. And this should just automatically work for us. So this tells us that the mock server actually updated okay, and it's actually doing that import now. So it's looking at multiple files, and when we're building up that service definition, it says, okay, well, where are these messages defined? They're actually defined in that other proto file. So it just sort of magically worked for us. But this will allow you to split your proto file into multiple pieces if you want to do some structure around that, or if you've got very large definitions around the message structures or the type of services that you want to make. You'll be able to split those into multiple files and import all of those into that root file. That root file, again, is defining where the starting point is. So that root file is typically going to have your import statements. But if it's importing a file, that file could import another file. Um, I don't know about like circular references, um, but basically this is how you would structure multi-file protos.
And that's a lot more readable. It's a lot more consumable for people working on the API. That's nice.
Cool. So let's recap. We built out all the 4 different types of endpoints that we can use with gRPC. We talked about some of the benefits of it, how we can do kind of the streaming in multiple directions. We basically built all those out. We showed you a little bit about how to do testing, and how that testing sort of structure is a little bit different in the collection side of it, where we're doing sort of the before invoke and the after request or after response sort of sections. We got lots of snippets that you can go in and look at as well. And we've got whole blog posts on like how to do testing in gRPC. So let me grab that blog post. I'm going to drop that one in chat as well. So this blog post is all about how do we do testing in gRPC. So this was written by one of our teammates, and it links over to a bunch of documentation on how to do testing in gRPC.
I
Yeah,
was poking around. So I mean, we basically just got started, but like we didn't even look at some of the other elements. I think that's a fantastic primer, but there's also like, what's a trailer? And then we
good
looked
question.
at like what else could we do before? Like what even would be necessary before and then after? Somebody had a question about does PM send request work? So we didn't even explore that. And then I was thinking, okay, tests. Like my easiest go-to is saying test status code is 0 on every single one of them.
Right.
And I noticed that the
You could do
collection,
you could do that at a collection level as well.
you
So like,
I don't think you can. So
oh, you're right.
this
Actually,
is
yeah,
in
we did that up
beta.
here.
This is actively in beta. So the engineering team is actively taking requests. And of course,
Yeah.
like we uncovered a bug over on the bi-directional streaming one.
Yeah. Cool. All right. As far as wrap up goes, so I did hint that I was going to do some live coding about this. So I'm going to drop the link to my Twitch uh, account here. So I'm Ian the Postman over on Twitch, and I'm going to start some live streaming maybe once or twice a week over the next couple of weeks. And I'm actually going to code up the server side of this, just to kind of show like what would actually need to happen on the server side to actually go process these different endpoints. And we'll be using Postman along the way to kind of say like, let's use Postman to actually go hit the server and make sure that that's behaving properly. Show you about the code generation and things and documentation generation that can happen when you have those profiles. Cool. Joyce, anything else you want to shout out before we wrap up?
You said this at the beginning, but we do have this gRPC. This was just an introduction, but I think there's a lot of buzz, especially at bigger companies that are struggling with microservices. But if you're like gRPC, not for me, we do have upcoming Postman Intergalactic coming up. So, do you know the details about that at all?
Yeah, the intergalactic that we have coming up is basically, let me turn the chat back on. So the intergalactic is basically our renamed space camp, and the next one that's coming up is an introduction for testers. So if you're relatively new to Postman or you want to kind of brush up on how to do testing for RESTful based APIs, Pooja and Carson are going to be running that session in 2 weeks, just under 2 weeks. So you can definitely go register for that. The registration link is live and ready to go. Those videos all get saved and they get put on YouTube as well. So if you can't attend live to ask questions, that's okay. But we'll have a team of moderators standing by as we go through all of those sessions. We have a team of moderators helping out to answer questions kind of as we go.
So there's that one. If you're like gRPC is not for me, and if you're like thirsty for more gRPC, Ian, you said there, a lot of this is for internal services, but we did find one of the very few companies that does have a public gRPC API. And I believe
Yep,
you are going to be streaming with them in a few weeks. So keep your eyes peeled for.
yep,
I don't even think they've announced their gRPC API yet because they're so few and far between, but it's a
right,
big deal. So you're going to be exploring their data API. That's your
yep,
clue. I won't tell you who
that's
it
right.
is.
So go follow me on Twitter. You can follow this username on Twitter. We'll be tweeting all about it as we get ready to go live and with the marketing promos. Definitely give Postman a follow on Twitter. It's just at Postman, and we'll have all kinds of marketing material out there. We post all the stuff on LinkedIn as well. So definitely give us a follow. If you're watching this on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. Go ahead and subscribe, and we put all of our videos up on YouTube after the fact.
Smash that like button.
Yeah, that's right. Leave us comments. Tell us what you liked, what we did wrong. We're happy to take any and all feedback. Aside from that, Joyce, thanks for hanging out today. It's
Yeah.
always fun. I
Thank
think the
you.
last time you and I did a live stream, we were like making all the lights blink with Jan and Arlemy. So it's been a minute.
Possibly. I just got my 3D printer hooked up to the internet. So I know you're a big 3D printing geek. So maybe
Yep.
we could do a future live stream about that.
For sure. We had one long question come in. Not clear. I wanted to say, could we use an actual server instead of the mock server? Yeah, if you already have your gRPC server running, you can totally hit that. But with the API builder inside of Postman, if you're building the API, we'll actually spin up a mock server for you in case you don't have an actual server built. But even if you have an actual one built, because that might be kind of in flux or changing, we give you access to the mock server. Just you've got something that you can code against in the meantime. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming by, and we'll catch you next week on our live stream.
All right. Goodbye.
All right. See you, everyone. Have a great day.